Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to today's event. Welcome Brother Joram to Canada. We came here at our invitation. We are so honored to have you here with us. And welcome to our Masjid, Islamic Community Center of Milton. So before I ask you the first question, you're just going to see this clip.
Daarnaast blijkt uit onderzoek dat antisemitisme en homofoob geweld velig tieren onder Marokkanen. De legitimatie voor deze ellende, de islam. Verzoekt de regering haar angstige en politiek correcte houding ten aanzien van de islam te laten varen en de negatieve invloed van deze kwaadaardige ideologie die moet worden tegengegaan, verzoekt de regering de islam zoveel mogelijk uit Nederland te bannen en gaat over tot de orde van de dag.
That was me back then. This is me now.
So let's talk about the period before Islam. Why did you hate Islam?
Assalamu alaikum everybody. First of all, I want to thank the organization for inviting me. It's a great honor for me to be here in this beautiful community, so thank you for that. Why did I hate Islam? Well, I think there are several reasons for me. First of all, it has to do with my upbringing. I was brought up in a pretty strict Protestant environment, and as people perhaps know, or not, in some denominations of the Protestant Church, there is this historical anti-Islam vibe, as you can call it, because when you look at the founder of the Protestant Church, Martin Luther, in 1517, he started the Reformation in a sense. He started the Protestant Church. Before that, there was only the Roman Catholic Church in Europe and the Eastern Orthodox Church, but he started the Protestant Church, and he was very anti-Turkish because there were a lot of clashes with the Ottoman Empire, the empire before Turkey became the Republic of Turkey. And there were many clashes, and he was of course a theologian, and he wrote about the Turks, and he wrote about their ideology, their way of thinking, and of course their religion. And he said, well, Islam is an evil ideology, it's a fake religion, Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is a fake prophet, not a real prophet. So it was very anti-Islam in a way, but that way of thinking was very deep in the denomination of my church. So when I was brought up in the church, it wasn't so much that my parents or the minister told us you have to hate Muslims or you have to hate Islam. But when you read the books, and I was kind of a nerdy guy, so I read a lot of books, it influenced you, of course. So I thought, well, okay, perhaps it's the people are very nice, perhaps, I don't know, because there weren't many Muslims around. But their way of thinking and their whole religion is a very dangerous thing, especially from a religious point of view, because we were practicing Christians, and most of it was in the 80s, in my 80s Amsterdam. Of course, most of the people weren't religious anymore, especially in Amsterdam, very liberal, very atheistic, secular environment, so we were kind of a strange family in that sense. And that was what it was, and after 2001, in 2001 I started with my study. I became a student of comparative religion, but the first day of me going to college, remarkably, was September 11, 2001. So I already had these negative ideas and a negative attitude towards Muslims and Islam, and then I saw these guys flying in a building, and I said, okay, they're even more crazy than I thought. And then there was this famous filmmaker in the Netherlands, his name was Theo van Gogh, and he was murdered in the streets, a guy who called himself a jihadi. He shot him, then he tried to slit his throat, and he stuck a knife in his stomach with a letter on it, Ayan Hirsi Ali, perhaps you ever heard of the girl. She lives in America, she used to live in the Netherlands, she was a member of parliament as well. You are next. So then I thought, okay, we have these guys flying in buildings. I already knew their ideology is evil because of what I thought I knew and what I read. And now I see Theo van Gogh getting murdered in the streets near my old house. So I thought I have to do something to protect the country from getting attacked by this evil cult called Islam. So I thought, what can I do? What brings the most impact of going into politics? Because I can change the law then. And I was looking for the most anti-Islamic party there was. And just that year, the Freedom Party was founded by Geert Wilders. Perhaps you ever saw him, the guy with the blonde hair. He's died, by the way. But he said, well, I'm going to fight Islam. That's the core business of my political party. And I thought, well, that's the guy I'm looking for. So I joined his party. But so that's one part, the upbringing and the terror that happened. But also, it's a cultural thing, because like I said, in Europe, there have been many clashes with the Ottoman Empire, and way before that, it had to do with clashes with Northern Africa. So European, when you look at European history, and Abdul Hakim Murat, a sheikh from Cambridge University, he wrote a book called Traveling Home, and in the book he describes where Europeans identify themselves for the first time as Europeans. And there has been a clash in the year 732 in Poitiers in France, and the Muslims came from Northern Africa, and they came through Spain to France, and there was this guy, Charlemagne, and he stopped the Muslims. So when you look at extreme right, anti-Islamic organizations, sometimes you see the number 732, or you see 1683, and 732, that is a reference to the year 732, where the Muslims were stopped in France. And 1683, that's the reference to the year that the Ottomans were stopped in Vienna of entering Europe. So they say, well, we are still in a war. And those, because one of the guys who, the crazy, the terrorist who shot all the Muslims in Christchurch in New Zealand, he had those numbers on his rifle as well. And when we were looking at the news in the Netherlands, there was this girl on the news, and she said, well, he wrote down how many victims he wanted to make. And she thought that's 732. But all the people who were very anti-Islam, that's not the case. He said, I was still in this battle. We had a battle in 732, we had a battle in 1683, and now here there was back when I thought 2015, he's on his third battle in the bigger war against Islam. So this whole idea of Muslims entering Europe and taking over, etc., is pretty much in the core of European identity, because the first time, the oldest texts they found when it comes to Europeans identifying themselves as Europeans has to do with this 732 battle. And it was found in 754, and it was written that people said, well, we are everything that the people who are invading us are not, and the other way around. And then they said, those people are Muslims, so we are not. So the core identifier of Europeans back then was, we are not Muslims. So it's very deep in European culture, and a lot of people don't know that, but there are a lot of symbolisms, or symbols still in Europe that point to this anti-Islam vibe that there is in the core of the European identity. And one example, and I mentioned it many times before, is the croissant. You know, the sandwich. It is shaped in a half moon. And in this battle of 1683 that I mentioned, there, in the end, the Europeans won. They won, and they drove the Ottomans back to Turkey. And they said, well, we defeated Islam. And what they did, they baked moons in the shape of a half moon, and they broke it, and they ate it, so to say we broke Islam. And I already told you, yes, it's not a boycott, a call for the boycott of the croissant or something, but it's just to show that the croissant is a symbol of anti-Islam sentiments as well. And there are a lot of these examples that I can mention when it comes to Islam and European identity, European culture. And most of the people don't know, but yeah, I do, because of what I read. And it's very deep in the culture. So, and then of course there's the media that portrays Islam in a very negative way, but also that has to do with a lack of knowledge, but also this historical vibe that is in Europe. And people don't know it most of the time, but it is still there, and it influences a lot of people's minds. So it's very hard for Muslims to convey a message to people who are almost born in an anti-Islam state of mind. I mean. So I think the combination of those things make me very anti-Islam.
So guys, it's okay to eat croissant? No boycott of croissant. Now, what made you embrace Islam? What was that moment when you realized that Islam is the religion of truth?
Yeah, well, it wasn't just one moment, because it took me about, I think, 3.5 years, because some people think that I rolled from the lab of Geert Wilders into the mosque, but that was not how it went, of course. When I was in the Freedom Party in 2014, I left the Freedom Party. I was still in Parliament until 2017, but in 2014 I left because of a rally. There was this rally, and Geert Wilders, the leading guy of the party, he asked the people in the gathering, do you want more or less Moroccans in the Netherlands? And everybody started shouting, less, less, less. And he said, well, I'll make that happen if you vote for me. But I was a spokesperson on this topic in Parliament, and I didn't know he was about to say that. So I called him and said, what is this? Is it something new? He said, yeah, this is something new. And I said, well, we used to talk about Moroccan criminals or Muslim criminals or whatever, but it was never about the ethnicity per se. And now he said, well, all Moroccan people have to leave the country. And then I said, well, I think it's kind of crazy, because although I was very anti-Islam back then, there were also people with a Turkish background and a Moroccan background working for the Freedom Party. And of course they were all anti-Islam, they were secular or another religion, but they were Moroccan. So I thought to myself, it's kind of a betrayal, because we all fight this concept of Islam, and I don't care if someone is old or young or man or woman or Moroccan or Dutch, I don't care, we were just fighting Islam. And he said, well, that's collateral damage then. And I thought, yeah, it's a betrayal, you know. So I said to him, you have to change it a little bit, so that I can talk about it, and that I really can talk about it from the heart. And he said, no, I'm not going to change it. But we got into a little fight with words, of course. And then he said, then I'll leave the party. I said, well, you won't. But I did. So I left the party, and then I finally had the time to fulfill a long-held desire. And I was writing an anti-Islam book. Because if you're in politics, and I think it's the same in Canada, most of the times that you, it's about one-liners. It's just some superficial thing you say, and then you get it in a newspaper, on the news, television, radio, whatever. And I thought to myself, well, if you really want to explain to the people why we think Islam is a danger for the world, then I have to write a book, an academic book, that I can explain why is it that we, and especially me as a Christian, think this is a false religion and this is something we have to fight with everything we have. And then I started writing, but while writing the book, I made a comparison between Christianity, the concept of God in Christianity, and in Islam. So I was writing, and all of a sudden, some questions and doubts that I had as a youngster popped up again. Because when I was younger, I always thought it was kind of complex to understand the Trinity. In Christianity, you have God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. And all of those three persons are one in essence. And I always thought it's kind of crazy, because Jesus Christ dies, of course, in the narratives of the New Testament. But I thought God cannot die, because God is eternal. That's in the same Bible. It says God is eternal. But how is it possible that you die? Because if you die, you're not eternal, because you're dead at a certain moment. So I thought that's kind of crazy. And even when he hangs on the cross in the narrative of Christianity, he talks, he prays to God. And I thought, how is it possible if you pray to yourself? If you are God, it didn't make any sense. And when I was younger, I think 16, 17 years old, I asked the ministers, and I even went to a Catholic priest, and I was not a Catholic, of course, I was kind of strange, but I wanted an answer. And in the end, they said, well, it's too complex, it's a mystery. And I thought to myself, yeah, I want my religion to be clear. I want to understand what I believe. If my soul depends on it, the least thing I can expect from the creators, that I can understand what I have to believe. So I thought, and then I thought, perhaps I'm too stupid, I'm just uneducated, I'm a young kid, 16, 17 years old. I put it aside, and I just did what I did as a practicing Christian. But when I was writing my book, I was an older man, of course. So then those questions popped up again. I thought to myself, oh yeah, there was some things I doubted. And then I saw for the first time, because I studied comparative religion, so I knew about the concept as an abstract idea, as an object of study, of course. But I never looked at Islam as an alternative for the truth, with a capital T. So I thought to myself, well, there is some truth in it, perhaps, because it sounds more logical. And then I thought to myself, well, I have to refresh myself and reread the Bible to understand why I'm not a Muslim. So that's what I did. But then, when I was reading the Old Testament, for people who don't know, it's, let's say, part 1 of the Bible. It's the same Bible as the Jews have. The Old Testament, they call it in Christianity. And I was reading about Moses and Noah and Abraham, etc. And they all talked about one God, one God, one God. I said, okay, perhaps something changed with the coming of Christ, Jesus. So then I thought I read the New Testament, and not what the others say about what Jesus said, but what he said himself. So I was looking for quotes, so to say. And there aren't many, by the way, but there are a few. And one of the stories in the New Testament is about Jesus interacting with a person who asks him, "What can I do to gain paradise? How can I go to heaven?" And this man asked him, he said, "Well, you're a wise man, what can I do?" And he said, "Well, there are 2 rules that God gave us. One," and then that's they call Shema in Hebrew. He repeated what the Jews learned. And he said, "Oh, Israel, here your God is one. There is one God." So, and then he said, "Treat your neighbor as you want to treat yourself." He said, "If you do these 2 things, then you can go to paradise." But he said, "It's hard enough if you really want to do that." But I thought to myself, well, now he is talking about one God as well. So I thought to myself, perhaps there is some truth in this one God concept, besides the Trinity. So I thought, if Jesus says that, all the prophets in the Old Testament say it, and now I see the Islamic narrative and the Islamic concept, I think there is some truth in it. So I thought, okay, I can accept this one God concept as the Muslims present it. But then, of course, I was happy because I didn't want to have something in common with the Muslims and nothing in common with Islam. So I was happy there was still Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, but I thought he was a false prophet. So I said, okay, at least they had their false prophet. That's the distinction between me and Muslims. But while I was writing, I came across so much information that was at odds with the things I thought I knew, that I thought, well, I also have to write to Muslim scholars. And one of the scholars I wrote was Abdul Hakim Murat. He's a sheikh in Cambridge University. And I wrote him, but of course, after I sent him the letter, I thought, well, it's kind of crazy in a way, because I was an anti-Islam politician, writing an anti-Islam book, asking a Muslim sheikh from another country, can you help me with some information? So I thought, well, perhaps he will never answer, and I put a little Wikipedia link on site, so he would know who I was, because I didn't want to give him the feeling that I was tricking him or something. So that's what I did, and it took, I think, 6 weeks or something, and then after 6 weeks, he was very extensive. He sent me an answer, and he said, well, I know where you're coming from, I understand it, but it doesn't make any sense. And he said, well, what you have to do is reread all your own books, so you're really anti-Islam again. But if you do that, you have to promise that you read the books and articles that I give to you as well. So he said, when you read book 1, and then you have to read book A that I give you. Read book 2, read book B, read book 3, read book C. And he said, then you can see that where the Orientalists or the non-Muslims who wrote about Islam, they took the wrong turn, where they added stuff that wasn't there in the beginning, or they left things behind or left it out where it was in the original scriptures of the Muslims. And he said, then you can see where they took the wrong turn in a way, and why their narrative changed. And that's what I did. And he said, it's not always on purpose. Sometimes it was just because they didn't spoke Arabic fluent enough. So he said, it's not always on purpose, but the result is the same, that they created an Islam, for the Westerners in this case, that isn't true Islam. So you get a whole mixed and wrong idea about what it is. So I did what he said, so I was reading, and in the end I was so moved by what I read in the Islamic sources about the Prophet, that I thought, well, I have to read more about him, about who he really was. And then I came across the story of Hind. And Hind was, of course, the wife of Abu Sufyan, and she was the enemy of the Prophet and of the Muslims. And she gave money in a way to kill Hamza, his favorite uncle, on the battlefield. And that was what happened. So his uncle got killed, Hamza got killed, his ears were cut off, his nose was cut off, and they were parading around with his body parts. Of course, the Prophet was very sad, and horrible things, of course, happened back then. And years later, the Prophet came in power in Mecca. And I was reading this book of Martin Links, it's called Muhammad, his life based on the earliest sources. And I was reading this book and I was looking for, okay, Hind is still there in Mecca, and now he's in power, so where's the part that she gets killed or crucified or her hands cut off or whatever? That's what I thought that he would do. And then I saw that he said, well, I cannot look at her right now because of what happened, but everybody here is forgiven and bloodshedding is over, so we start over again. And if you want to live among the Muslims, stay. If you don't want to live here, go. I don't care. If you want, it's your choice. And then I thought to myself, how is it possible that someone who I thought was almost anti-Christ forgives someone who kills a relative, a favorite relative even? And then I thought to myself, okay, the image that I had in my mind is wrong, because this man, whatever I think of him, I cannot no longer say he was an evil man, because evil men don't forgive their opponents, especially not the ones who kill relatives. So that was something that really changed my mind, but I didn't want to be a Muslim still. I think, I have something in common with those people and with the whole concept of Islam. I didn't feel like it, because I trained myself almost to be anti-Islam, anti-Muslim, and whatever. So it was really almost part of who I was. And my work was anti-Islam, my friends were anti-Islam, so the whole context was anti-Islam. But in a way, I felt, it was something that was constantly on my mind. So I thought, well, the concept of one God I can accept, so I believed that. And then in the end, I thought, yeah, well, I think he's a prophet. But then I thought to myself, well, that's practically Shahada, if I say there is one God and Muhammad is his messenger. So I thought to myself, okay, that's it, I don't know. It's taking the wrong turn now. So I closed all the books and I put the books on the shelf because I was writing this book. And I already told you yesterday, it sounded a little bit like a fairy tale, but it really happened. I put all the books on the shelf, but what happened was that a lot of books fell off because it was too full. And one of the books that fell off the shelf was the Quran. And when I picked it up, my thumb was on a page and it was on Surah 22:46. And if you translate it into English, it says, it's not the eyes that are blind, but the hearts. And then I thought to myself, that really is my problem, because I really could see what I had written down myself. Nobody forced me to write a book. I wanted to write a book. And I still didn't want to be a Muslim. So it wasn't my eyes, it wasn't my intellectual ratio. I could see what I saw. I could say, yeah, he is a prophet, yeah, there is one God. But I still didn't want to be a Muslim. So there was something else. And I thought, yeah, it's my heart. My heart was in a kind of way closed. And what I then did was, I did like a little dua. Of course, I wasn't a Muslim yet, so it wasn't a real dua. But I did a prayer and I said, well, Lord, I don't care if it is the God of the Christians or the Muslims. Just give me a sign or something so that I'm 100% sure that this is the way. And well, of course, like I said, there wasn't no golden rain and there were no unicorns jumping around or whatever. There was no real sign in that kind of sense. So, but I thought to myself, well, I go to bed now, I go to sleep, and next day I'll stop and do something else. But when I woke up, I felt very secure, and all the doubts I had and all the things I was doubting and anxious about, they were gone. So I felt very secure, and I thought to myself, well, I think I'm a Muslim. And then, yeah, of course, I told my wife.
It is not the eyes that are blind, it is the hearts that go blind. SubhanAllah, this is a very powerful verse. And your story reminds me of Hazrat Umar, his story of conversion. When he became Muslim while reading some of the verses of Surah Taha. Some of the converts that I have spoken to, I think Quran has a very powerful impact on them. I think it has a miraculous effect on the hearts of people. In your book, I haven't read your book yet, but in your book I've read some of the excerpts online. After taking Shahada, you said, and I quote, "However, I did notice a certain personal delight and rest." Can you explain that feeling? Can you?
Yeah, that really was, like I said before, I really felt secure in a way. And of course that was after my dua, and I still wasn't a Muslim yet, but a few weeks later I did Shahada with a friend of mine and 2 imams. And when I said Shahada, it was like I was, it sounds a little bit corny, but it was like I was at home. And what do I mean with that is that when I was a Christian, I always had this like a conflict between the heart and the mind. Because for example, the Trinity, I wanted to believe everything that the church taught us. And I really wanted to believe in the Trinity and whatever, all the dogmas of Christianity I wanted to embrace. But I couldn't, because my heart in there says, that's not the truth. And so there was always this conflict between heart and mind. And when I became Muslim, after I did Shahada, that feeling of conflict was gone. So it really gave me peace in heart and mind. And that's what I meant with those words.
SubhanAllah. So Brother Joram, what you did takes a lot of courage, particularly when you are a public official who's being aggressively promoting a certain viewpoint. Did it ever occur to you when you were about to become a Muslim that there's going to be backlash, there's going to be consequences, I don't know, there's going to be threats, you might lose your political career? Did it ever occur to you?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, those things were on my mind, of course, in the end, after I realized, okay, I think I'm a Muslim. What does that mean? First of all, you think, well, I have to do all this stuff, all these things that I didn't have to do as a Christian. I have to pray 5 times, I cannot do this and that and whatever. I saw this whole bunch of rules that I had to comply, and I thought, well, that's one thing. And of course, my own context, because I was an anti-Islam politician. And I already left Parliament when I did Shahada, but then I worked, funny enough, for a Christian organization. It was the biggest Christian organization in the Netherlands. It's called the AO. It means Evangelical Organization, and it's a television station. And I worked for the radio, and I was the spokesperson for the conservative Christians in the Netherlands on radio. But of course, it was kind of strange that the spokesperson for conservative Christians in the Netherlands all of a sudden is a Muslim. So of course I thought, okay, I will lose my job. But alhamdulillah, I have my own business as well, so it wasn't the biggest problem financially. But it was my public position in a way, because of course everybody was about to say he's crazy or whatever. And then I thought, I have to tell my family, my mother, everybody. So all these things come across your mind, your old friends, will they stay friends or not, will they leave me, will there be threats, etc. Well, all the most negative scenario came through. So I lost the job at the radio. Yeah, my mother started crying when I told her. Some friends said to me, "You're dead." There was an uncle said, "I won't shake your hand anymore." I got over 2,000 death threats. When I was walking the street, people were calling me names. You know, all the most horrible scenario came through. But in a way, I felt at ease with it. First, because I thought, well, if that's the price I pay, so be it. I'm happy now. So I was more happy and I felt more strong inside than ever before. So I didn't care that much, but I was more worried about my wife and my children and the friends that I still had.
So I was actually about to ask you this. How did your wife react?
Yeah, I told you yesterday, so you know. Well, after I told her, it was in the morning, really early, I told her, well, I'll be Muslim. And then she looked at me and she said, well, we have to put the dishes in the machine. And I told her again, I said, okay, but I think I'll be a Muslim. And she said, yeah, and I think you have to put the dishes in the machine. And then for the third time, I said, yeah, do you understand what I mean? I'll be a Muslim. She said, do you understand what I mean? I said, no, I don't understand what you mean. What do you mean? And then she said, well, if you are still my husband, and you will be the same husband that I married, and you're still sweet for me and the children. And if Islam is really what you believe, and it's in your heart and in your mind, then who am I? So then we'll stay together, of course. But that means life goes on, and if life goes on, we have to put the dishes in the machine. So that's what we do.
So you're spilling the beans here because that's what most of the husbands do at home? Put the dishes in the machine?
Apparently.
Or you're forced to? Okay. How did your kids react, and now that you've become a Muslim, do they ask you questions about Islam? Or do they see you a changed man? Do they see any change in you?
Well, when I became Muslim, my children were very small. They were really small children, so they didn't know what was happening. So I think the oldest is old enough now, so sometimes she asks some questions, but the youngest doesn't, because she has. I'm already glad that she can talk and walk and stuff like that. But later on, of course, they will have their questions, and when they see me talk or speak or pray or whatever, of course they know, and they know I am a Muslim because I told them. And sometimes they ask, what do you have to do then, if you're a Muslim? So I explain them, and so it's kind of funny sometimes to talk with them, because it's not a real theological conversation, of course. It's just more like when you're praying, someone jumps on your back and stuff like that because they think you're playing. So that's funny. But it was more with my friends, of course. It was a bigger problem, and one of my friends, and I think he reflected what a lot of friends thought but didn't say. He said, well, to me, and he is an atheist, by the way, he said, well, I don't care. I think you're all crazy, all religious people. And I love you very much, and you're my friend, but I think you're wrong anyway. And I said, okay, I knew it. I knew him for a very long time. So even when I was still Christian and he was already atheist, I accepted it. But he told me, well, it's like, and we love football in Europe, real football, not American football. So, you have two really big teams in Europe. In Spain, one is Real Madrid, perhaps you ever heard of it, and one is Barcelona, and they're like competitors. And he said to me, well, it's just not done what you did, because it's like you went from Barcelona to Real Madrid. And it was in a way what a lot of people thought, and because some were very in the overdrive, so to say, because some of my old friends, they said, well, and that's still very crazy, but they said, now you're a race trader. I said, great, what do you mean with a race trader? I said, yeah, you're a white European guy, you cannot be a Muslim, that's impossible, it doesn't make any sense. So I told them, well, there are more white European Muslims than you think. I said, no, name one. I said, well, a whole country, Albania, or Bosnia, or Turkey, or whatever. There are a lot of people, it has nothing to do with the skin color, or my eyes, or whatever. I said, Islam is a universal religion, just like Christianity in a way. There are Christians and Muslims of all colors, all races, all ages, whatever. But I said, no, that's different. You're a race trader.
So you gave some historical context about the anti-Islam feelings in Europe. What do you think about the rise of Islamophobia in the West, particularly in North America, especially among white Caucasians? When you see all these conspiracy theories like the Great Replacement, right, being floated around, and what is the best way to deal with this? Yeah,
well, when it comes to the Great Replacement theory, yes, of course, perhaps some people know it, perhaps some people don't. It means, in a way, that there is this secret agreement of governments that in the 1970s that the Middle East gave cheap oil, and the governments in the West opened their borders for the Muslims to come in. So it was like a hostile takeover. For the elite, they made a lot of money, and now everybody else will suffer the Islam in a way. But it's a very old theory, because has been a French guy, Raspail is his name. He was in a way the 70s founder, and then it wasn't so much about Islam, it was about Africa. He said a lot of black Africans coming into Europe were being taken over, etc., etc. So there's always this idea of we are being taken over, whether the Muslims or the blacks or whatever. There's always this feeling of there's some fear in a way. But it's very dangerous, because if people are afraid, you can do stupid things. And that's what you see in politics, of course. And like the things I mentioned before, the history, terrorist attacks, that are real as well, of course. A lack of information, a bit of racism, and a combination of all these things, and fear, for example, the replacement, that makes people very angry and very hostile in a way. But I think it's very important to stay sober in a way, and very rational, because it's also a tactic of explicitly from anti-Islam politicians to make sure that Muslims get portrayed in a certain way, most of the time as aggressive, irrational, crazy people. And what they do, for example, 2 weeks ago there was a guy in the Netherlands, it's an organization called Pegida, and Pegida is an organization, it's all over Europe, in Germany, France, Italy, Sweden, but also in the Netherlands, and it's an organization that wants to get rid of Islam. It means, it's a German text, but it says, we are the homeland and we want to get rid of Islam. And what he did, he said, well, I'm going to burn the Quran on the city square in the second city of the Netherlands, Rotterdam, and I'll see what happens. And before that he said, well, we'll see that Muslims are very hateful, aggressive people. I'm just burning a Quran. And then if people start screaming, shouting, or whatever, he said, I told you so, look at them. Beasts, irrational, screaming, aggressive persons. But it's a tactic. So the best thing, of course, everybody gets emotional, and of course everybody wants to punch him in the head and take the Quran away, etc. But from a media point of view, it's very stupid, because you give him what he wants. He loves it when someone punches him in the face and he can fall down and say, I told you, you're attacking me now, I just have my freedom of speech. So it's a tactic, and it's very hard not to fall for the trap. But that's what it is. So the best thing is to stay rational. Of course you can complain, but just do the things you can do in a legal way. And of course, I think it's good to protest, because if you don't protest at all, then you become like Christianity in the West. So I don't care, everybody can be a Christian, whether you're really believing or not. In Christianity, there are not many things really holy anymore to the Christians. And I think it's beautiful that Muslims are still emotional when it comes to the holiness of, for example, the Quran. So I think it's good to protest and to be vocal, but be aware of the fact that there is this tactic behind, there's a strategy that wants to attack you as a community, and I think it's very important to be aware of that.
My next question is about the virtual reality experience, but before I talk about that, let's watch that video.
Misconceptions, anger and fear in the media, but especially in politics. This is Islam in the current West. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Joram Van Klaveren. I once was a member of the Dutch Parliament and a representative of the anti-Islamic Freedom Party of Geert Wilders.
Do I have a problem with Islam? Yes, I do have a problem with Islam. I think it's a fascist ideology. I think we should stop the Islamization of our society.
But the turner of hearts had other plans. Today I am a Muslim. And it was knowledge that led me to Islam. Learning about Allah, the beautiful character of our Prophet, and the astonishing history of our deen. What if we had a way to let people experience Islam in its true colors?
Currently, we reach 10,000 people a year. Next year, we want to share the message with 100,000 people. And eventually, we want to grow to 500,000 people a year. Please donate and help us spreading the true message of Islam and promote compassion and understanding. Thank you so much.
So how much, let's talk about the purpose of this video and how much did it cost you to create the video?
The purpose is just to make sure that people understand a little bit more about Islam. It's just conveying the message on a very low-key way. It's just basic stuff, so to say. And we want to promote empathy and understanding. So that's what we do with video, and it's especially aimed at non-Muslims. But nowadays we also aim at Muslims because we've noticed that a lot of youngsters, young Muslims, they need like an iman boost. Because some of them are not really proud of their identity as a Muslim, and they really don't know about the history, they don't know about the inventions, they don't know about the greatness of the religion in a way. So what we do now is that we try to help them develop this pride in a way. And for the non-Muslims, it's just like a wake-up call in a way. Just take notice of what Islam is. Perhaps it's something for you, and of course we would love to forget to become Muslim, of course, but that's not the goal. The first goal is just to take away misconceptions and promote empathy and understanding. And like it said in the video, we reach about 50,000 students a year now, and we want to grow in the end to 500,000 a year. And that's the purpose and the whole concept of IAC.
And how much did it cost you to create the video?
To build the video, it's pretty expensive. It was 100,000 euros. So it was pretty expensive. And of course, you have to develop a whole strategy because it's not just some people just look at the VR film or video and then they put it away. But it's a whole concept. So normally when we go to a school, it takes about 45 minutes. It's just a guest lesson. And first we start with asking people. It's like an association round. We ask them, what is the first thing that comes up in your mind when you read or hear the word Islam? And it doesn't matter if it's good, bad, negative, positive. You can say everything. We hope that you will be honest. So if it's about terrorism, if we write down terrorism. If someone says mosque or beautiful religion, we write that down. So in the end, the whole school board is full of different words. Then we explain to them how the VR devices work. They put them on, they look at the video, and after we watch the video together, then we return to the board, and then we look at them and we say, okay, well, what you have just seen is very different than some words here on the board. And then we say, how do you think you said terrorism, and now you have seen and heard a lot, how do you think about it now? And then we start a conversation, we explain them a little bit more, and of course there's a lot of information in the video as well. But after we finished, we've done a research, I think a year ago, and we looked at the results. It doesn't have any impact, because if it doesn't, we can better do something else. But we saw that over 75% of the people who at first were very negative, they really changed their minds. And said, well, we didn't change our minds on all the Muslims, that's what they write down, but definitely on Islam. We didn't know that Muslims were such a bad example. Some people say that. So yeah, well, there is some truth in that. But I say it's about the Islam. Do you want to know more about Islam? We already have 2 people, students, they converted to Islam after it was like the kickoff. So that's really beautiful and important. Yeah, so it's alhamdulillah, a very successful project until now, and yeah, we hope that we can grow, of course. And also we have a partner in New Zealand. They bought the box that we created, and we send it to them, and they go around schools now as well, but they also develop a van, a big truck, so to say, and in the truck there is the school class. So in New Zealand it's a little bit harder to go into schools, because in the Netherlands you get invited and you can do whatever you want. But in New Zealand it's a little bit different because of secularism and the strict separation of church and state. So they often go to events or to parks or whatever, and then they invite people and they look at the video, and like I said, they have the same concept, because there's a pedagogy, there's this learning system, there's a whole bunch of information and a whole strategy around it. And they do it not in the class, but they invite people and they create their own class in the van. So it's a very remarkable project until now.
I have seen it and it's amazing. My son actually saw it. He was talking about Muslim youth and he loves it. So yes, I think Muslim youth should also see this video. I would recommend it. Thank you, Brother Joram. Thank you for your time. It was wonderful speaking to you.